Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about 4 tricks that you can think about when writing a melody. So what are the 4 things that are really going to make a melody work for you? Because I know lots of people get frustrated with this. They say, I've got some chords, I'm trying to write a melody, but it doesn't seem to fit. Or I've got this melody, the chords don't sit very comfortably with it. So let's see what we can do to make sure that things really work. Well, the first thing is to make sure that all the notes in a melody actually do fit a chord scheme. Now, either you're writing a melody to a chord scheme, or you might just be writing a melody on its own. Lots of people have to do this kind of stuff for theory exams, for example. But either way, a melody needs to imply a chord scheme. So we've got to be sure that if we write something in a melody, it's going to fit with chords that make sense. And then we've got to be sure that every note that we write in a melody is there either because it's a harmony note, i.e. a note that belongs to the chord that's either given or implied, or we've got to make sure that every note that doesn't belong to the chord can be justified because it's one of these things that we call inessential notes, passing notes, auxiliary notes, anticipatory notes, those kind of things. So the first tip is to make sure that melody notes belong to the harmony, either as essential notes, harmony notes, or inessential notes. So let's have a look at this melody and see if that actually happens. First of all, I might just play it so you can see what it's sort of all about when you hear it with the chords that I've put underneath. Okay, let's have a look through, see what's happening here. Now, either you've chosen this chord or it's implied. We're in the key of G major, but all of these notes in the first bar, the first measure, belong to chord 1 in G major. We might just give this a time signature in passing as well. It's in 4/4 time. So the chord of G is G, B, D. So all these notes, G, B, D, G, all belong to the chord of G. Okay, let's have a look at what's happening now, because the chord is changing to a chord of D, so that's D, F sharp and A. Okay, now you might look at this and think, well, hang on a minute, this G going over there while we change to a chord of D is a bit of a clash, isn't it? Well, that's what we call a suspension. In other words, it's prepared here, because when you have a suspension, you've got to have 3 stages. It's got to prepare, it's got to sound, it's got to resolve. We prepare it by making it part of this chord here. When it resolves, it's got to be part of the next chord. When it sounds, it's a little bit of a dissonance. But the point is that suspensions really spruce up melody writing. They add a bit of tension, a bit of sparkle to it. You get this moment of dissonance that then resolves. So you hear what's happening. First 4 notes belonging to the chord of G. Preparation for suspension, dissonance, resolution as it resolves into that chord. So that's how that works. So there's a suspension. Now, once I move on to F sharp, well, F sharp belongs to the D chord, the D, F sharp, A. E doesn't, so E is a passing note. It's just passing by step between F sharp and D. And both F sharp and D do belong to the chord of D. So that's okay. It's just a passing note. Then when I move on here, well, I've got a couple of passing notes here because D and A both belong to this D chord. You could say that the C turns the D chord into a C7 momentarily. The B is certainly a passing note. And it's possible to have 2 passing notes next door to each other, as long as they're passing by step. Usually one feels accented and one feels unaccented. One feels a bit stronger on a beat or even a half beat, like this case, and one is just tucked in between. So, this is a stronger one, the B, than the C, because the C's coming between two quavers there. The B's coming on the last quaver of the bar. But all the notes in that bar then can be justified. They either belong to the chord, or we've got a suspension, or we've got passing notes. When we go into the second bar, the second measure, we've got a chord of E minor. All these notes belong to E minor. So that's all part of the harmony. Then we've got this suspension thing going on again. You'll notice what I'm doing here. Actually, this is a sequence. The first bit's slightly altered, but all these notes are kind of running a third below these notes. So it's using a little bit of sequence. And that's not one of our sort of 4 tricks today, but it's one thing that's good in design of a melody, to have a sequence like that, a pattern that is repeated and moved around, transposed, so that it becomes familiar, but at the same time it's varied because it's coming at a different pitch. But the same things are going on here. So I've got a suspension here in just the same way we talked about before, and then I'm moving to a B minor chord. So B minor is B, D, F sharp. So you can see again that I've got passing notes, like there's a passing note there because D and B both belong to the chord. And then I've got this note that's either an unaccented passing note or it's making a seventh of the harmony. The G's definitely a passing note, and the F sharp belongs to B minor chord again. Going into the next bar, all these notes belong to a chord of C, C chord, C, E, G. So all of those belong to that chord. And then if I use a D or a D7, in fact what I was going to do there was to have a D chord and then add the seventh in the bass to pull me onto this G/B chord. So D, well, D's part of the harmony, E isn't, but it's a passing note. F sharp is part of the harmony. And when I go on to a G major chord, well, obviously both of those G's belong to the harmony. So in this bar, I've got lots of harmony notes and just one passing note there. When I come into the last bar, well, I've got a G over a D. It's a 1C chord, if you like. And B, therefore, belongs to it. C is an upper auxiliary note. So that's when we have a note that belongs to the harmony, like this B. We go up one and we come back again to a harmony note. Then I've got a D7 chord where you can see that A, F sharp, A all belong to that chord. G is a passing note. And then I'm finishing on a chord of G, and that G belongs to it as well. So you can see what I'm talking about. This is the first trick to make sure that everything in your melody is either a harmony note or one of these inessential notes that we're talking about. So it doesn't really matter which style you're writing in. It particularly works well in Baroque and classical style. This is a kind of Baroque style melody, isn't it? But you can see how every note can be justified. One thing that messes up a melody is when you start hearing notes that don't belong to the chord or the implied chord. And then you sort of think, well, what's that doing there really? If it's not a harmony note and then it can't be justified as one of these inessential notes, it tends to stick out and rather muck up the melody. So there's the first trick. Make sure every single note is either a harmony note or an inessential note. Okay, another thing, second trick, is you might think when you write a melody about the balance of conjunct and disjunct movement. So what do I mean by that? Conjunct movement is kind of moving to notes that are next door to each other. So if I'm doing that, just going up and down, then that's conjunct movement. When I'm leaping, this is disjunct movement. Now, if you have a melody that's all disjunct movement, it's going to feel a bit dislocated, notes flying all over the landscape. If you have a note that's full of conjunct movement, it's going to feel a bit tedious after a while. So some kind of balance between the two. Have a look at what I've done here. Can you see in the first bar? Well, this is obviously disjunct. It's followed by a run of conjunct. So there's a nice balance between the initial disjunct and then the following conjunct. You'll also notice that in this case, the disjunct movement is taking us up, the conjunct movement is bringing us down again. So sometimes that's quite a nice balance to achieve between the conjunct and the disjunct, but also kind of what's climbing, what's falling to balance it. Because of the kind of use of sequence, well, we've got something very similar here. Disjunct movement, then conjunct coming down this scale, then disjunct. Now conjunct, but this time it's not coming down. This time it's going up. So we're doing something different. Then we've got disjunct, and then this is much more conjunct. Okay, there's a little leap there, but it's much more conjunct finish, and that's kind of helping to settle at the end. So that's the second trick that I'm just presenting for you. The idea of thinking about the balance between the conjunct movement and the disjunct movement in your melody. Now, another thing is you can't write a melody without really thinking about the harmony. So even if your task is to write a melody, but nobody's asking you to think about the harmony, if you don't think about the harmony, you can be sure that you're going to have notes that are all over the place that don't really work for you. But part of thinking about the harmony is to think about harmonic rhythm, and that's my third little trick that I'm talking about today. Harmonic rhythm. What do I mean by that? Well, harmonic rhythm is the rate of chord change. How often do the chords change? If, for example, you've got one chord that goes on for the first two bars or measures, and then suddenly the chords change really quickly, then the harmonic rhythm is going to feel a bit jarred because it's going to feel static and stuck, and then suddenly it takes off. That's going to be a little bit crazy. If, on the other hand, the harmonic rhythm is moving too quickly all the way through the piece, that's going to kind of feel a bit exhausting after a while, and it's not going to help the melody to kind of find its place and settle, because the harmonic rhythm can do much to help a melody feel settled. If the harmonic rhythm is predictable, well, that becomes a bit tedious after a while, because we always hear that the chord changes at the beginning of every bar, or that you've always got two chords per bar or whatever. So again, it's a balance. We've got to have a sort of consistency about it, but we've also got to vary it a bit. So by presenting it this way, I'm trying to show you how the harmonic rhythm works in this piece. So what have we got here? In the first bar, we've got a chord on the first beat, a new chord on the third beat. The same pattern runs in the second bar. So a chord on the first beat, a chord on the second beat. So it sets up a harmonic rhythm, doesn't it? A kind of expectation of what it's going to do. So when we get to the third bar, we think, I know what's going to happen here. We're going to have one chord here. We're going to have one chord there. So I've slightly changed it. We've got one chord taking up the first half of the bar, just like we have before. But in the second half of the bar, instead of one chord, there are two chords there. And that just gives you a little bit of energy in the harmonic rhythm. And then in the next bar, the final bar, one chord on the first beat, a new chord on the second beat. Well, we haven't had that before, have we? And then one chord that takes up the second half of that bar. So you see what's happening with a harmonic rhythm. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can hear the harmonic rhythm has a kind of rhythmic life of its own. It sets up this pattern I talked about, and then it starts to evolve the pattern. Also, you notice that the harmonic rhythm gets a little bit busier on the approach to the cadence at the end of the phrase. That adds energy as we approach the cadence. So you might not want to do that every time, but you might want to do that some of the time. So harmonic rhythm, consistency, but variation. That's my third trick. And the fourth one that I want to talk about in this video is about rhythmic character. Because one thing I find that people often do when they're writing melodies is they think about notes, and they might think about some of this harmonic stuff as well, but they don't really think about rhythm. So you look at the melody and there's just crotchet after crotchet, or quaver after quaver, quarter notes, eighth notes, whatever. And you need to get some variety into the rhythm in order to make it have character. If I use the same chord scheme, but I had a melody that wasn't kind of full of rhythmic character, it might sound like this. And so on. It's all right, nothing wrong with it, but it hasn't got the same kind of sparkle, has it? So what do I mean by rhythmic character? Well, you don't want to have, hundreds of different rhythms going on, because again, that is, the whole thing sounds a bit disjointed. But neither do you want to be just repeating the same old rhythms over and over again. And the danger of that is that people start to think, I need to get the notes right. Maybe I'm thinking about the chords a bit, but then they don't kind of revisit it and then think, how can I add a bit of rhythmic sparkle to it? Well, you see what's happening here. We've got this 4-quaver idea, so that's kind of kicking us off. This tied note is giving us a little bit of syncopation. So syncopation comes there and it comes again there. You don't really want to have a rhythmic thing that only happens once in the course of a melody. Otherwise it sounds as if it doesn't quite belong to it. So the idea of using it here, then using it again, is to make that belong to something that we've heard before. We hear it again and we think, yeah, this is part of the character of this. The idea that having had these quavers, we might have some semi-quavers that generate forward movement in the rhythm, give us a bit of energy, taking us into the next bar. But if we had a whole piece that ran around in semi-quavers or 16th notes, we'd find it all too much after a while. So a little bit of a balance going on. The same rhythm being used in the first bar of the first measure and the second bar of the second measure. So I've used the same rhythm twice. If I'd used the same rhythm a third time, it would have been too predictable. So the third time, I'm choosing to change that. So what have I changed? Well, I've got rid of the tied note, the syncopation in the middle of the bar, but I've used this rhythm that we've had before. It's just that when we've had it before, it's been part of the tied note. This time it isn't part of the tied note, so it's a kind of evolution. At the end of this bar, 2 quavers there, but that's relating to quavers we've heard earlier, but previously the quavers have come as groups of 4. This time, only 2 of them. This figure here, slightly different in its melodic design from what we've had before, but again, we've had this quaver 2 semiquavers. We certainly used it here. This time it's repositioned. It was on the 3rd beat of the bar there. Now it's on the 1st beat of the bar. The idea of the 4 semiquavers, well, we had them here, we had them there. Slightly different melodic pattern this time, and it's a different place on the bar. It was on the 4th beat there, now it's on the 2nd beat. And then right at the end is the longest note. And that's often what we need, something that's going to settle at the cadence, particularly when we're coming to the end of a piece or the end of a section of a piece. So there we have it. 4 tricks that will enable you to write a decent melody. So notes in the melody that fit the harmony or the implied harmony, or that are legitimate inessential notes. Thinking about the balance between conjunct and disjunct movement in the design of your melody. Thinking about harmonic rhythm, and then doing something to inject kind of character into the rhythm in a way that gives you consistency and variety. And then, of course, there are lots of other things you want to think about. What's the tempo? What's going on with the dynamics? What's the articulation going to be? These things are all issues that add to character. But those are my 4 tricks that I offer you in this video.